Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mr. Rowe. We're looking in Algebra 2A. This is lesson number 9, complex numbers. We're going to focus on what you got to do in numbers 3 through 6. So let's take a look. So what we're doing here is we're simplifying radicals with negative values. Now, before this lesson, you wouldn't have been able to do this, but now we have complex numbers that we can use so we can actually simplify a radical with a negative by using the fact that the square root of -1 equals I. So that's what we're using as our basis here. So what do we have to do? We have to factor this value into terms that we can find square roots of. So 48 will break down into several things. It's 2 times 24, 3 times 16, 4 times 12, 6 times 8. So what I want to do is I want to pick the one that has the biggest perfect square root factor. So the one that has the biggest perfect square root is this one, 3 times 16. The square root of 16 is 4. So that's what I'm going to use. I'm going to use those two values. And I also know that -1, I can take the square root of that. And so that's how I'm going to simplify this. So I take the square root of the things I can take the square root of. Square root of 16 is 4, so that will come out of the radical. The square root of -1 is I. That also comes out of the radical. And then the thing that doesn't have a perfect square root will remain in the radical. So there you go. That's what you got to do. Break it down into perfect square root factors. Take the square root of the things that you can take the square root, move those out of the radical, and then leave in the radical what you can't take the square root of. So let's take a look at one more before we move on. No, actually, this is like one of the ones in the lesson. So square root of -36. Well, 36 is a perfect square root already. I know that if it's negative, I'm going to use I as a factor, as a square root. So this is going to equal 6I. And this one, I think, is like number 5. So again, what we have to do here is we have to try to simplify each radical. And then if we get to a place where we can combine, we're going to combine terms. So let's look at this one. We've already done 48, so we'll do this one again. So we're going to use 3 times 16, which is 48. Remember, -1 will factor as well. So I'm going to take the square root of the things I can take the square root of. So square root of 16 is 4. Square root of -1 is I. So that gives me 4I. Square root of 3 is left in the radical. What about this one? The only thing that factors here is the -1. So I can take the square root of that, and that's going to give me I times the square root of 3. And now because these are the same, I can combine these two terms by just adding the coefficients. This one has a coefficient of 1, so 4 plus 1 will be 5I square root of 3. And then our last example, or our next example, let's say. So this one's kind of like the last one. So I'm looking here. Well, what do I have for factors of 54? 9 times 6. 9's a perfect square root. So I can take the square root of that. I can take the square root of -1. So that's going to give me 3I. And then 6 doesn't have a factor, so it stays. -1 is the only thing that's going to factor here. And again, because this part is the same, I can combine the coefficients to get 4i square root of 6. And now, let's take a look at this one. First thing I'm going to notice here is that this doesn't have a negative. This will. So when we get to where we can simplify, we're not going to be able to combine any like terms. So what does 125 factor into? 25 times 5. I can take the square root of 25. Okay, what does this factor into? So I have the negative 1. Then I have 25 times 5. I can take the square root of 25. I can take the square root of negative 1. So that's going to be 5i square root of 5. Nothing combines. Final answer. One last one. Same deal here. What does this factor into? 4 times 7. I can take the square root of 4, which is 2. Same deal here. So 2i square root of 7 finished. So I hope that helps you with lesson 9. If you're still struggling, let me know in a teacher message or send me or make an appointment for a help session.